Hello Internet! I'm the Disney Brain, and after several lists highlighting the very best Rangers, it's high time to start giving praise to the very best episodes. So, I figured the most logical place to start would be the beginning. Several beginnings, actually, as we count down the top 10 best Ranger premieres. And along the way, we'll discuss what I think makes a great first episode, be it the way it hooks you with its premise, or the way it effectively builds a foundation for things to come, or both. But even with those parameters, it was surprisingly difficult to separate the picks here, so don't get too hung up on the order. Past number 6, it really was a toss-up. So, with all that said, let's kick things off with number 10. I'm not sure if there's a more on-the-nose, laugh-out-loud opening episode of Power Rangers than this one, to the point where they even make a joke about brand new Rangers not knowing the morphing sequence. Ninja Storm as a season is not going to be for everyone. It's a season that prides itself on being more absurd than what's expected of this franchise, in addition to being heavily self-aware of said absurdity. I mean, there was literally no other reason to turn Sensei into a guinea pig. But even then, there's subtle beauty in the way that them being late, as per usual, leads them to their powers. They became Rangers, not just because a scroll told them, but also because they decided to help when help was needed, thus avoiding Lothar initially. Prelude to a Storm delivers a solid opening, in large part because while not being exceptional per se, it's very representative of the rest of the season. If you can get behind the major tone shift, then you're gonna love what comes after. I haven't spoken much about Dino Charge, but I lovingly describe it as the time Saban got his groove back. While Samurai was good at times but largely underwhelming, and Megaforce was content with just existing, Dino Charge reminded us on the opening gun that Rangers can still be fun. And they did it in a creative way by reinventing the thought process behind character introductions and allowing Shelby and Tyler, the two all-stars of the season, to carry the load first. The seamless, charismatic charm of Tyler, mixed in with the go-getter attitude of Shelby, jumped off the screen almost immediately, especially with Shelby, whose important dynamic with Kendall, also highlighted here, adds a ton to her character growth in both seasons. There is really not much to this episode beyond Keeper's history and our first look at the new powers, but there really didn't have to be. This season, more than anything, was driven by several good characters and a couple excellent ones. And here, we get a great first look at just that. And considering the character drought we had suffered through just before then, this could not have come at a better time. Not surprisingly, Day of the Dino works for a lot of the same reasons the very first episode ever works. In a season that excitedly basks in the idea of being a legacy season, what better kind of start is there? But what was great here is the pacing, on top of kicking things off with Tommy's triumphant return. With a two-part opener and only 3 Rangers to start, we learn a ton initially about the characters, where they are now, and how they could potentially progress, as well as the dynamics these teammates will exhibit. What also works very well is the intrigue this premiere presents us with, the tempered, downplayed introduction of one of the greatest PR villains ever, the fact that this Anton Mercer guy apparently shouldn't be around, the fact that Tommy knows as much and is partly responsible for all of this. There's a lot to unpackage here. But what hurts this opener a little bit retroactively is the fact that so little is done with Tommy in terms of responsibility. It rings a little bit hollow when his creations are this season's foot soldiers, but at no point does it really ever affect him. Which it really should, since, he also used to fight for the wrong side. But other than that, great episode, and a great start to a great season. Emergency! In spite of the very uninteresting episode title, Beginnings gives us so much on a narrative level in just the opening 5 minutes. And once all 40 plus are done in this 2-part premiere, we have a pretty good indication of just how good this season could be. But here is where the foundation was built. You've got a plucky, yet clearly unideal to start, trio that plays second fiddle to A-Squad. That sets up the need for progression and advancement, because A-Squad not only disappears, but they come back on the wrong side of the law. Sky is set up as an asshole, but then grows to understand others and himself before becoming the Red Ranger he always could be. And we get a good initial understanding of what SPD is as a concept, an organization that lives in the realm of nuance, where roles aren't cut and dry, and actions carry more weight than looks and backgrounds. All this in a society where there are more looks and more backgrounds than ever before, so being able to navigate that and then do something meaningful about it ends up defining the entirety of this season's greatest aspects. That's incredibly difficult to highlight in just 2 episodes, but SPD, for the most part, gets it done. So, while the season itself is a little up and down, especially towards the back half, the opening provides one of the strongest foundations of any Ranger season. Back to the place where it all began. Even for as relatively straightforward as this episode is, it quietly accomplishes a lot. It effectively establishes Jason as not just a good leader, but a level-headed one, who in part wants to do something more. It establishes the defining traits of one Zack Taylor. It gives us an initial insight into Kim and Trini's major hobbies, both of which are used to set up several focused episodes down the line, including Kimberly's eventual goodbye. And, maybe most notably, Billy is established as a bona fide nerd who fully understands his physical shortcomings. As such, he takes it upon himself to do something about it. That way, the bumbling Bulk and Skull can't have their way with him anymore. And yes, it's pretty awesome that the lovable goofballs attempt to learn self-defense here and then actually use it in their finest moment. And that's the simple beauty of the first ever Ranger episode. They find a way to do something interesting using almost everything we see in these opening 22 minutes. And that doesn't even factor the actual Ranger elements. Sometimes it takes a year, sometimes it takes 5, but nothing is wasted. Because even at the very beginning, the characters came across as people first. And 25 years later, that notion still holds true. Similar to SPD, RPM hooks you in within seconds with its unique opening, the unique aesthetic, and an equally unique cast of characters, all of which demanded deeper analysis of. And every bit of it was set up so well, forcing you to ask so many questions that can't be answered in 22 minutes. Heck, some answers we still don't have now. But what really makes this one of the best premieres yet, even beyond just how flat out great an episode it is on its own, is how central the elements here are, how the show keeps coming back to these moments. Road to Corinth is always presented as this unifying point for the characters, and for good reason, because extraordinary circumstances force their hand, and, more to the point of Power Rangers, force them into one another, to all eventually come together as a team. And it's only after we've seen it all do all the minor details set up here add up completely. But let's not undersell the technical aspects of this one either. The camera work and shot selection were beyond top-notch by Ranger standards, the acting was at an all-time high, and the writing both for the screen and for the dialogue was on point across the board. The only thing really holding it back is itself, since it's not presented as a multi-part opener, even though RPM really had a 5-part opener when you consider how seamless the flow of the plot is to start. But, even still, well deserving of its top 5 spot. In Space provided a superb opener because it represented the elevation of the franchise into something more than what it had been. What also worked really well is how they effectively continue this season opener off the back of the Turbo finale, one of the rougher ones we've ever seen. That finale set up a situation where the Rangers had to go the extra mile, literally and figuratively, to save Zordon and the franchise. Because of that simple fact, there's obviously no Zordon here to assemble the team and tell them what to do and when to do it. For this team, all they had was what they could figure out for themselves, an idea In Space would continue to come back to and utilize well. And their first major hurdle on that front was convincing Andros that despite his dark past with teammates, he'll need a few new ones now. And along with that, we get Astronema's excellent introduction, a cabal of villains that need to be dealt with at some point, and the most powerful idea of all, the expansion of the Ranger story into the setting it was always meant to be in, space. The first 2 episodes of this season prove that nothing was going to be easier this go round, not even close. Heck, The Earth Rangers don't even have access to non-tattered clothes until Part 2 nearly ends. But in a season defined by overcoming increased magnitudes of challenges, it was an ideal start that built up to a damn near perfect finish. Time Force likely does the best overall job at hooking you with premise alone. The distant future, time-traveling cops, a villain that proves to be all types of badass right from the jump. It's got everything. There's so much to establish and so much to get through that we don't even see Wes until Part 2. And even then, there is still the expected adjustment period, so some assembly is still required. But beyond the novel motif is the groundwork laid for the more personal aspects of the Time Force story. Despite being from the future, having good intergalactic relationships, and access to perfect genes, the thing that drives the story more than anything else are the timeless aspects of emotion and personal struggle. As such, the first episode ends with Alex dying, for now, and Jen needing to carry the mantle of leadership with a heavy heart. So even though time itself could rip apart if this team fails, what's more in focus this season is how loss, anger, and revenge are bigger motivators here. And we also see that this is something equally as true of Rancic once his backstory is revealed. And then, when Wes appears in Part 2, we set up both a top-shelf character and a top-shelf character dynamic, all in one fell swoop. Wes forces Jen to confront a complicated and unsettling mixed bag of feelings and thoughts, while Jen forces Wes to actually fight for something, progress as a person, and eventually make his father proud of the path he chose. It's a damn near perfect introduction for the narratives and the themes Time Force does a spectacular job at working with. But it is admittedly a little similar in several respects to another all-time great opening episode, except without making as many characters matter retrospectively, since Lucas really doesn't, and Katie's overall involvement is limited at best. It's nitpicky, I know, but hey, I gotta separate these top-tier episodes somehow. With most entries on this list, what we see are premieres built on a strong foundation of concept, episodes that can thoroughly entertain while also providing a great peek into what's to come. And only one premiere does it better than the one belonging to the most underrated season of Power Rangers ever. A season built on not just understanding martial arts, but understanding each other, has a pair of pilot episodes where the main three are allowed to do both. RJ proving that looks aren't everything was a good start, but everything that Jungle Fury prides itself on is highlighted by Casey's nunchucks. A plot point that sees Lily using her personable nature to drive change out of Theo, which then leads to Casey and Theo both learning skills they lacked through learning from each other. Moments like these are the clearer ones, but what was also more subtle here is the way they establish the parallel growth of Casey and Jared, a pair put into conflict in the opening minutes, and both of whom keep growing in their own ways as the season progresses. What we see with Welcome to the Jungle is the elevation of what made pilot episodes like Day of the Dino or Beginning so good. They get it almost all right here, and few episodes after the fact lose track of this firmly established foundation, which is even more important for this season, since building upon cleared hurdles is more meaningful when learning and advancement is at the forefront of the narrative. A narrative that goes above and beyond simply fighting monsters of the week, but understanding the importance of learning to fight, learning the mentalities behind the fighting, even when the fights aren't external, understanding divergent perspectives, allowing said perspectives to understand your own, and as a result, becoming better Rangers, a better team, and better, more nuanced people. And when it's all said and done, every single main character here, not just the Rangers, but every character, understands exactly what the purpose of Jungle Fury is. The only thing that kept it from being number one was the botched way they handled Master Mao's death and almost immediate return. And fittingly enough, our number one pick handled that same kind of plot point in a spotless way. But before we get there, let's bring in some honorable mentions. Surprising absolutely nobody is yet another high spot for the legally required Lost Galaxy portion of this video. Joking aside though, this was the pilot that reinvented Rangers. Literally, we went from teenagers with attitude to older professionals with more nuanced personalities. This shift in casting culture allowed our franchise to finally free themselves from the limiting shackles of high school, something they needed to do. Not because there's anything wrong with a high school setting, but because you can't tell too many types of stories using exclusively a high school setting. As such, we get a cast of mostly developed characters who are all allowed to show us something more beneath the surface, and because of that, we leave this season with a great understanding of who each of them are, even without knowing a whole lot about their past or how some of them got here. Establishing those small but telling character moments all throughout the opener was necessary, because the best plot lines in this season are character driven, first and foremost. That in turn leads us to the theme of sacrifice and the multiple forms it takes throughout the season, and it all starts here. A sacrifice that not only pushes Leo into the role of Red, but also pushes a team together, several of whom don't really know each other yet. Mike is gone, Miranoi is stoned, and in the first 40 plus minutes, the Rangers don't really win. In fact, they lose. They lose badly, and it costs them a lot. And that's before Scorpius shows up. But now what? How do they respond to that? How do they deal with and eventually overcome their daunting circumstances? They get stronger. They train harder. They work to defend what they still have. And even though some connections are currently lost, they form strong new ones and become perhaps the most cohesive Ranger family to date. There was no Space Wizard here, no Ranger Mentor here. There was no one that could tell them how to be Power Rangers. They simply, and quite literally, needed to be adults about it and figure it all out, all while making time for their TerraVenture responsibilities. And that's exactly what they did. In line with the idea that anyone can be a hero, these otherwise normal people proved day in and day out why the Quasar Sabers chose them. And the one Ranger that wasn't technically chosen still goes above and beyond whatever Destiny originally planned right until his defining moment. All these great character moments and developments built off these moments, these decisions, and these sacrifices. Lost Galaxy is number 1, so the list is done. And even though it may seem like an easy or obvious choice coming from me, trust me when I say that there was almost nothing separating the top 5, and quite frankly, I'm still not sure the order is quite right, and I'm nearly done recording this thing, but hopefully my uncertainty fosters plenty of great conversations from perspectives I may not have considered initially, so don't forget to discuss your own favorite season openers down below. And as always, thanks for watching.